Do you know that feeling when you think about a past situation and you go back through what you said or you did and you think, man, I really messed up? I had that a couple weeks ago happen to me. I had been listening to some video lectures titled The Spiritual Life of a Leader by Stephen Martin. I was listening to that and going through, and there was a video entitled Red Flags in Your Ministry. And as I went through it, it was like, oh man, I've messed up. I heard something that really stuck with me because I needed to hear it. I know I'm probably not the only one that needs to hear it. Tonight we're going to talk about Mary and Martha, which is where that material in the video was derived from. And I want to examine some of this and some of the suggestions that were given there and utilize them for our own purposes here. But hopefully, I imagine that this is a familiar story to everyone. And as I was talking about this, my wife said, this is not going to be the usual Mary and Martha thing, is it? I don't think it is. We'll see. So if we look at Luke 10, where this is recorded for us, this sort of just floats on its own. There's a discussion about how it connects to before and after, so it's kind of a tightly wound unit for us. And it reads, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.'" And it might not look at it like it, but there's a lot that we can dig out of this. First of all, we're told presumably about the younger sister, sitting at the feet of Jesus here, or visiting that first, presumably. And what we have here is, based on what we're told in John, and here that Mary and Martha are sisters. Mary is probably the younger sister, Martha is the older sister, and the woman of the house, and you have this situation here. There are a few things to remark on. If we look first at Mary, and we understand what is going on here in the context of their day and age, there's actually some surprising things occurring. Mary goes, and it says that she was sitting at the Lord's feet and listening to his teaching. And the other times that that's used in Scripture, that's indicative usually of a disciple going to a rabbi. This mention of her sitting at Jesus' feet is the language of her taking a seat as his disciple, which was radical. In Jewish custom, women were not allowed to assume the position of a disciple. In fact, some have remarked that we have no historical record of a woman ever being a disciple of a rabbi in ancient times. They could stand and learn from a distance, maybe, but she sort of boldly and maybe even presumptuously took a seat at Jesus' feet. She knew him, I would say, and she knew that he would accept her. She was there to hear his word. The kingdom of Jesus, even then, upset cultural norms as it does today. It's possible to see this as Mary being, the irresponsible little sister and shirking all of her responsibilities to help host, but Mary had other priorities. And I want to just note a couple of those things about Mary so that we understand that this was an unusual situation. And I want to point out the difference that we see here with Jesus and his disciples versus others, although it's not the main point of our lesson. But even though sometimes it looks like Mary is a little irresponsible, the text makes clear that it is Martha who was misguided. And so we have this discussion here about Martha being distracted. In verse 40 it opens, but Martha was distracted with much serving. Mary's not the one who is called into question here. Martha was the woman of the house, and here she had a famous rabbi and his disciples, maybe at least 13 people there in her house. And so that would have been stressful. This would have been a lot of work, and she let her momentary stresses get the best of her. Yes, Martha was preoccupied with all of these things, and she lost her focus. But it goes deeper than that. I feel like at least when I've heard Mary and Martha talked about, it's just she was distracted and needed to listen to Jesus more and make sure you still get your housework done. But we need to ask, why was she distracted? What is the problem here? What was observed in this lecture that really struck me was the red flags that we can identify here with Martha. They were offered more in commenting about those in, being vocational pastors or missionaries or whatever it is. But more generally, I think if these kind of things that we're about to discuss pop up, there is something wrong with my thinking, we can say. If I see these things in my life, then there's something wrong with my thinking. Because Martha here is noted as being distracted, and Jesus very gently corrects her for the way that she was behaving. If we look at these red flags, the distractions, I would say, really come from fear. So we could note first that Martha was afraid that her project would fail. She was trying to make dinner, and she was afraid that if Mary didn't help her and everything didn't go the way that she wanted to, then things were going to fall apart. So there was an element of fear there. Martha was also afraid that she wouldn't measure up to expectations. You see this in what she's saying about Mary. That she had a way that she thought things should go, and if they didn't go that way, it was going to reflect badly on her. She wouldn't measure up maybe to Jesus' expectations or maybe the other guests there, and so she was afraid in that way that she would fall short. And another one of her fears is that Martha was afraid that she wouldn't make a good impression. Things were supposed to go like this. And Jesus is supposed to be happy with the meal. You could just picture it in her mind that Mary's supposed to help me, and it's all supposed to go smoothly, and I'm going to look good in front of the rabbi and his disciples. And this is not malicious, right? This is just how human beings think. But she was afraid she wouldn't make a good impression. So these are the things running around in her mind, distracting her from the moment at hand and drawing away her focus from what she should be focused on. And it really gets into what I would say are the feelings. She had these fears, and so here were some of her feelings that we can see based on what she says in this situation. She was agitated. She was frustrated that things weren't going the way that she planned. She said something to Jesus about it. My sister's not helping me. Would you say something to her? We also see some anger. She was angry at her sister for not helping, and she was possibly angry at Jesus for not correcting her. And what she says to Jesus here, it's a rhetorical question because she assumed that Jesus would be on her side. Jesus, aren't you going to say something and make my sister help me? We also see that there was some anxiety. Her fears led to her feelings of being insecure and worrying about all of these things going on. And Jesus explicitly says that about her character later, just as an observation. I think Martha was probably an anxious person. And this was sort of her character to get wound up in her fears like this. We also see self-pity. She said, "Don't you care? Don't you care about me and that things aren't going well? She wanted people to feel sorry for her in the situation that she was in. Everyone should feel sorry for this situation. We also see that she's, as I've heard before, the blame-shame game. Things aren't going well because my sister won't help me. It's her fault, and she should feel sorry. And if Jesus doesn't say something, he should feel sorry too. And that's sort of that deflection that we can kind of do sometimes. And the last sort of feeling that we see here is that she was trying to control what other people were doing. Jesus, you should think like I think. And Mary should do what I want her to do, and everything would go just fine. Do you see these flags in your life? I'm watching this video and I'm going through it, and I'm sitting at Greg's table, shaking my head. Like, man, I'm not doing so hot right now on things. And this is not about all of you, this is just my life. But we have fears and expectations or ambitions that don't go the way that we want, and they can present themselves through various emotions. And these are some of the emotions that we saw that came up in Martha. She was trying to make things go the way that she envisioned them. And in particular, while trying to do things for Jesus, this is a question for all of us. In particular, while trying to do things for Jesus and serve the church, do you see these flags manifesting? That's where where a lot of the application goes for this episode, I think, is that Martha is trying to serve Jesus in what she's doing. She's trying to impress him. She's trying to make sure everything goes well because he's there in her house. And that translates to us in our service for Jesus, which we do in the church in general. So I don't want this to be a focus on doing our housework and getting upset about things like that. When we are serving Jesus, maybe just more generally in our lives, are these kind of things showing up? If the answer is yes, then according to Jesus, we're distracted. We're missing something that we're supposed to be seeing. So if we go even deeper, we ask, what was Martha distracted about? But now, what caused these feelings and fears to pop up? And that might take some reflection inside of you, but where do they come from? Martha appears to have thought that she would be valuable in the eyes of Jesus if she accomplished all these things that she had planned and impressed him. I think that's where a lot of her fear comes from. Maybe she thought that serving would make her a better person, and she's that type of individual that she tries to do all of these things so that people will like her. That's me too. This situation reveals that she was thinking from a perspective not with God at the center, as Jesus sort of tries to reorient her. She was thinking from a perspective of her at the center. And that's where these fears and anxieties and feelings come from, is everything is happening to me. This is the way that things are supposed to go. And when things don't go the way that I want them to go, it reflects back on me. We used to have 2 dogs. One of them turned 15 and we had to put him down. But those dogs didn't always listen to me. I had them pretty well trained. There was one in particular that I can tell you about later that seemed to make it his mission to make my life difficult, and we butted heads. And I would get so angry when he wouldn't listen to what I was telling him to do. And as I was examining myself, I realized it was because I thought this dog not listening to me reflected back on my ability to control things as a husband and a father and a pack leader, or whatever you want to say. Him not listening to me reflected on me. And so we can see that this is sort of the mechanism of how things happen like this. But my plans, my priorities, things going the way that I think they should, and we see this here in Martha. I want to suggest that there is a possibility that Martha believed if she did all of these good things, then she would be a good person. That's sort of the morality that I think we see in our culture too. You do good things and then you're a good person. It's a moralistic culture. But that's not what Jesus wanted for her. Because of her fears and her misguided attitudes, Martha was trying to gain approval by what she was doing for Jesus, rather than who she was to Jesus. And so if we were to identify really the problem here, I would word it as, because of fears and misguided attitudes, Martha was trying to gain approval by her efforts. It's important to emphasize that. She was trying to gain approval by her efforts for Jesus. There's probably a lot of us that do that, right? I'm one of those. Do you ever feel pressure to get as many things done as you can, or do them as well as you can so that people will think that you're a good Christian? That's the same problem. That is us taking God out of the center and putting us in the center and saying, if I do all of these things, then people will see me how I want to be seen. But we're shown the reversal of that kind of thinking here. In Jesus remarking about Mary and saying, Mary has chosen the best or the better part. So Jesus' language is very caring and concerned for Martha. If you look at verse 41, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. And that repetition of her name is called something, it's a double vocative. And a vocative is something like, oh man, or brother, or something, just an exclamation of somebody. But this typically is used of very gentle and caring. He was concerned about Martha. Jesus recognized her anxieties, and he didn't berate her for them. He helped her to see them for what they were, and he guided her to the right way of thinking. And that's important. There's a lot of us that have a lot of anxieties. And I will say that growing up, through my own personal experiences and others that I have seen that have had, whether it's issues with anxiety or other mental health or just problems in their life, the response that we usually give is something like, you just need to pray and read your Bible. In my personal opinion is that I learned over the course of my life that when someone says, you just need to pray and read your Bible, that means I don't know how to help you. But I don't want to admit that. That's not what we see Jesus do. He's helping her. He's taking care and concern about it. Jesus points her toward the truth that her anxieties about this situation were because she had lost perspective and wasn't thinking right. He didn't coddle her in such a way of saying everything's okay and you don't need to change anything. And that is sort of more of the way the mental health movement in our culture is sort of forming. You are totally fine in everything that you do and you don't need to change anything. The world needs to change. But that's also not what Jesus does. He points her toward the truth that she wasn't thinking right. And that was the source of what she was feeling. He says, you're worried about all of these things, but there's really only one thing that matters. And there's a textual question here in this verse, just to talk about it very briefly. You are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. If you're using the NIV, it'll say few things are needed, or indeed only one. Or most of the other versions say, but one thing is necessary. And they sound really different, but really either way, Jesus wants Martha to understand that there is a lot going on, but there's only one thing that she needs right now. And on the face of it, when you're reading this, you might think that Jesus is just talking about food. Maybe Martha thought he was just talking about food at first. Only one thing's needed. You're trying to prepare all of this elaborate spread, but we only need something simple. And I kept laughing as I was presenting this because in this way I could hear Jesus saying something like, Martha, pizza would have been fine. And that's really sort of what it is. If we're able, though, to look past the physical circumstances and understand his later statement about Mary in particular, we see that Jesus is talking about something more than food. He's talking about more than preparations. She is preoccupied by all of this planning and all of this doing, while she should be focusing on the fact that he is here. The Son of God is in her house. And her sister has recognized that and takes her seat at the feet of the king. The thing that is most important, Mary has chosen, and that is sitting and listening at the feet of Jesus. And Jesus says what Mary has chosen will not be taken away from her. There's discussion about that but it's probably what she gains through sitting and being a disciple of Jesus. No one or no power can take from her. But all of these other things that we get worked up about, those can fade, those can fail. Those change with time and what we feel like we need to do. Jesus says, being with me is what matters most. And we can see this example in Jesus' own life. If we look, for instance, at Mark chapter 1, and he has just gone on a journey of exorcisms and teachings and things, but it says here in verse 35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place, and there he was praying. And Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, let's go on to the neighboring villages, or some will say other villages, so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come. So he went out into all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Jesus had withdrawn, and his disciples found him and said, what are you doing? We have all of these people that we need to tend to. They had different priorities. And Jesus doesn't say, oh yeah, sorry, I just got caught up with time. He actually says, I'm not talking to them, we're going somewhere else. Because that's what I came to do. Jesus made it a priority in his life to be with God. That was his first priority. The relationship was foremost, and that is where his works came from. If the Father and the Son weren't connected, what would the Son do? Even his disciples thought that he should be out accomplishing more, doing more. Maybe in this situation, it's being more of a celebrity. But he knew only one thing was necessary. If we think about it, it's really easy to think like Martha, right? I do it all the time. We can be so occupied with trying to accomplish things, even for God, that we forget about the primacy of our own relationship with him. As an example from my own life, it can be extremely easy for me to get so busy in studying and writing for sermons or whatever else it is that I forget to feed my own soul. Times like that, if I look, I find that I'm not reading for myself and I'm not praying because I'm too distracted with what I'm trying to do. And I'm usually not doing so well when that happens. And I think, oh, well, the last 3 days I've skipped my devotional times because I was trying to squeeze in this extra thing that is for the kingdom, but I've lost sight of what's important here. For people in that position, myself included, in service for the church, it doesn't take much for that to turn into trying to accomplish those things to look good, to make a good impression, or to try to accomplish a lot because I think it will make me a good disciple. Or here's another one that I thought of. How about the parents here, especially the mothers, I would say? If you are going and going and going for your family, and the kids are all over the place and on the run, and you got to go to this practice and this appointment and whatever it is, and you don't take time for your own health, what tends to happen? Do you see some of those red flags pop up of maybe getting a little short and agitated and angry and frustrated and fearing that we're not going to make it to this or dinner's going to fall apart? I think that's the similar kind of thing that what we're talking about. But in addition to these couple examples, what can also happen if we lose perspective is that we begin to think that our value is derived by what we can do for other people. And that's a lie. This is a dangerous trap. It's one that, for some reason, as a young child, I learned that lie. That who I am and what I'm valued for is what I can do for other people. I've seen that in a lot of other people too. It's something that I struggle with in my own life, even still to this day. But what can happen there is that we begin to think that in order to be loved by God and to be loved by people, we have to do all of these things for them. And that's backward. We are loved by God, and we love God, and so we do these things. We love our brothers and sisters, and that is why we do these things. And what can this turn into? If you trace this slippery slope down the trail, it can turn into trying to earn my salvation. And if we haven't learned anything from this, it's that you can't do that. I'm not necessarily saying that that's even specifically where Martha is here. But I think we can all agree that that is a possible endpoint for this kind of thinking that we've just described. When we lose perspective on who we are and we lose perspective on what's important and we try to earn our value by accomplishing more and greater things. We have to search out what our motivations are. And here's actually a quotation that was provided at this end of the video that I've been talking about that summarizes what we've been talking about. And I think it's really powerful the more time you spend on it. And you could call this the solution to the problem that we've been talking about. The Mary in us has to rest at the feet of Jesus if the Martha in us is to do her work. We all have a Mary and we all have a Martha. And in order to do the one, we have to be focused. In order for Martha to do her work, Mary has to sit at the feet of Jesus. I want to mention now how what we're talking about could be abused. So I think it would be very easy. We might find ourselves using I'm just trying to be like Mary, or I'm just resting at the feet of Jesus as an excuse or a cover for not doing anything. And that is really just lying to ourselves. If you look at Scripture, you can see that a natural consequence of a right, healthy relationship with God is loving service to Him. What we're saying about all of this Mary and Martha stuff, is that there is a balance And again, we all have both of them inside of us, and we might have the propensity to be to one extreme or the other. But these actions in service to Jesus and to his church should be a part of a faithful disciple's life and not an end of themselves. Because when they become an end in themselves, they lead to burnout. I think really that is what this author that I'm talking about was trying to hit on too, is that especially for people doing this day in and day out, it leads to burnout. Or we could state it in this way: faith without works, even if we make it sound noble, is still dead. And that's a danger that we have to fight against. But only we will be able to know the difference in our motivations. But I want to state that to make sure that we're aware. So as we wrap this up, those who have been disciples for a while no doubt heard the story about Mary and Martha, especially the women probably. And you probably heard things like, you need to be less like Martha and you need to be more like Mary, but you still need to make sure to get that work done. But we need to understand what's really going on here. This is not about chores. Yes, Martha was preoccupied with all of these things and she lost her focus, but it goes deeper than that. Why was she so focused on all of that? Because she lost sight of what was important. She let her fears control her and thought accomplishing these things would make her good enough. We as people have all kinds of plans and aspirations and ambitions, and if we're not careful, those things can supplant what God actually wants for our lives. And that is sort of dangerous because it looks okay from the outside. Or maybe we don't even detect a problem with it. I'm doing all of these things for God, but if there's no relationship from where those actions are coming from, then where are they really being based out of? And that's what we have to look at. I want to end with a quotation from the Apostle Peter, our scripture reading from earlier, because I think that this is appropriate advice for what we're talking about here. Brother Peter wrote, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you." Whatever the plan or the ambition is, we have to humble ourselves and surrender those things under God's mighty hand. We should cast our anxieties on him and realize that he truly does care. As Jesus cared for Martha, God cares for you. And he knows if you have the tendency to do what she did. And he knows if these flags are present in your life. So maybe we need to ask for those to be presented to us. These red flags are presented in Martha here for the benefit of those who would read her story and Jesus' response to her. We're supposed to learn something from this. And if you see these warnings in your life today, I want to ask you, what are you going to do about them? What are you going to do about them? Only humbling ourselves and coming to sit at the feet of Jesus can heal the human heart. Let him help you. If there is some way that we can assist you in that, you can let us know by talking to someone or coming up to the front while we sing our closing song.